Hey everyone, welcome back to the lab. In this video, we're going to be talking about how to build a simple single file web API with F# Giraffe. So hopefully this will serve as a good entry point into how F# Giraffe works and can be used as a basis for building your own web apps with F# because you can just kind of take the code here and start adding endpoints and stuff, and build your own thing. All right, let's start off with an F# Giraffe overview. So Giraffe is a functional first micro web framework that plays nice with F#'s functional first nature. I have the GitHub linked here if you want to look at that. And basically, it's just a thin wrapper on top of .NET's ASP.NET web framework. This is most often used with C#. It's one of the fastest web frameworks in the world. C# is, a top 5 language, so it's extremely reliable, has had, thousands of man hours or man years put into it for its development. And so it's one of the best web frameworks in the world. And we basically get all of its features and reliability in F# for free without having to actually use C#. So that's one of the reasons I like Giraffe as a web framework, because we get to really use all the tools from C# land without having to bend over backwards for it. So that's basically what it is. And we're not going to go into too much detail about how Giraffe itself works here. So if you want to learn more, you can check out my other posts that dive into, a lot more details about this from different aspects. Looking at build a simple F# web API with Giraffe, which goes more into F# and Giraffe in general. More details about how each of these things affect it, how to configure it, how to set up endpoints, stuff like that. Might also be interested in endpoint routing with F# Giraffe. This goes more into the actual endpoint declarations and kind of the different options you have here. And you might be interested in top F# backend web frameworks in 2023, which is more about the different web frameworks that are available in F# and why you might choose one over the other. Ultimately, I like Giraffe, and I've been using that one for the past few years, but there's some other decent ones out there depending on what you're trying to do. So if you're interested in those, you can go learn more here, and then we'll go on into our single file F# Giraffe web API. So here, we're going to be building a very minimal API. It really only has 4 endpoints. These are the endpoints here. There's a get endpoint with user/input. This is going to return input and kind of show you how you can pass in stuff and return it. Then we have get/, which returns nothing. Then we have /get length input, which returns length of input. This is more showing you how you can pass stuff into an endpoint and do operations on it and return. This is more like what an actual endpoint would look like that you would write yourself. And then finally, a post/user, which returns this. Now, the idea here is to give you a very basic idea of how to build endpoints rather than showcase all possibilities. Those can be their own whole posts and even books, and that's why I have other posts that go into that. So here what we're just trying to do is give you an idea of this so you can just kind of get started building quickly. Now note, for this demo, we're really only going to show you these two because they're the most useful, but we just do have this here in case you want to do posts, because that's pretty common. And if this looks weird, like why didn't I just have these two? This is because it's basically the same setup as what runs F# Giraffe's web framework's benchmark candidate. We find the code here, the benchmark results here, and the benchmark requirements here to kind of give you an idea of this is a real web API being used for things in the world, essentially. So it's not just some random example. Okay, now before we go into the code here, I want to bring up my project and run it to show you that this is actually what this is doing, because you could never trust someone on the internet. They should always prove what they're actually doing, so we'll do that here. All right, so on the left we have my blog post, on the right we have the actual project. You can see that these match up here, the routes, and then I'm going to run it. And it says my application is running on 5000. We can see that we've got our app outputs here in terminal. And so with that running, we are going to open this, or I guess hit these endpoints ourselves. So /user/ I am an input. Let's do that. And we see that we get I am an input back. So here is /user like this. We pass it in some string and we get our input back here. So you can see that this is working. Give it an S, it returns S. And then if we instead hit this /get length /abc, we can see that it returns 3, which makes sense because there's 3. And then we do def, we should expect 6, and we get 6. So we can see that this is actually working as expected, as declared here. All right, so with that proof out of the way, let's actually go and look at our file. And so basically this is a single file web API. We're declaring the Giraffe endpoints, the handlers, and we're plugging them into ASP.NET Web Service in our single file, which is program.fs. And so here's the full source code of program.fs. It's just kind of dumped in here for posterity. So if you want to copy and paste this, you can. And I'm going to open this up in my VS Code instead so we can actually get some syntax highlighting, and we'll walk through kind of what this does. Okay, and so here we're back in the project. I'm going to make this terminal smaller, and I'm going to make the code a little bit larger so you can see it. And we're just going to walk through the code real fast. So here at the top, we're just opening a bunch of dependencies that we'll be using. Here we actually declare the web app. So here we're saying here are all of the endpoints. So here's the get endpoints, and then we have /user/, we have the /, and then the /get length/. These are the endpoints that I just showed you. And then we also have our post here. So you could imagine that this is also how you would be declaring things like, update, delete, and stuff like that, your HTTP verbs. And then you put the actual route in here. Route is just a basic route, nothing in it. Route F tells you that this is a formatted route, so it might pass in something. And so these are the route mappings. And then basically from the route mappings, you can then go call something else. There's some built-ins here which say like, hey, I'm returning just raw text from Giraffe. And then if you're actually building something that is substantial, you'll probably have something closer to this where, it's taking in a URL param. We're saying here, take the URL param like this, and then we're going to call something. This will be an HTTP handler, and then you might give it the input here. This is going to look like something like this. You have your handler, you have something that you're taking in, and then you're going to say handle context. This is the web context. So you can get things like other query params, headers, stuff like this. This also tells F# not to cache this. This is like a warbler. This is something that is dynamic, and so it can't be like a static HTTP or like HTML response. It actually needs to look at the input and it'll change each time. And then so this is always going to be a task, which is just like .NET's version of async. Here we're just taking s, which is the parameter here from the URL. We're just doing .length on it to get the length of the string, and then what we're going to do is return this. We're going to write this stuff async and then return the length as a string. If we're new to F#, this is probably a lot, but this is a crash course in Giraffe, not F#, so that's kind of beyond the scope of this video. So that is how we're kind of going to be declaring all our endpoints. This should give you an idea of how you can build your own endpoints on this, taking stuff from the request itself and using that to create dynamic outputs. And then basically we have a bunch of configuration. I'm not going to go into this too deeply because, again, this is something that could get very deep and complex by itself, and this kind of outside the scope of this post. But basically what you can do is take all of this stuff and just use it as boilerplate. This should be pretty decent boilerplate for most web APIs. At some point you will probably need other things like adding compression or middlewares and stuff, and you will need to come in and understand this stuff. But I'd say for like most simple web apps and stuff, you can just take this as boilerplate and start going with it. So we're not going to go into this too much, but basically all it's doing is this is ASP.NET stuff. You're telling it how to configure and run. We're saying here's how to configure services, and configure services we're saying, hey, you need to use routing, hey, you need to use Giraffe and set up its dependencies because we're going to be using that. And then finally we're saying, hey, configure the app, and that's when we say, hey, here's the endpoints and how we actually connect it with the endpoints and stuff we've created here. So yeah, that's probably as deep as we'll go for this post. Okay, and so again, all the code's here if you want to copy and paste it. And yeah, for the most part, you can use this configuration as is. Eventually you'll need to change it, but just treat it as boilerplate for now and get on with your web app building. And now in order for us to actually run this, we need to basically declare an FS proj. And this is basically how we declare like what are the dependencies of this app, what source code is even included in the app, what order do you need to run this stuff in, how do you build it, and stuff like that. So if you're from like JSLand, it's like the app.json stuff. If you're like Python Django, it's like app configs and pyenv and stuff like that. And so ours is just very simple. We're basically saying, hey, we want the .NET SDK for web here. We're targeting .NET 8. This is returning as an exe. We want some packages. We want F# Core 8. We want Giraffe 7 so we can at least use it. And then basically the only file in here is program.fs. So once we have that in place, you can basically just run this with .NET Run as I showed you, of course, assuming you've installed .NET on your system. And that's basically our single file web API. Now, if you want the full project source code, which I showed you in my VS Code, and that's available here on GitHub for HimMinions members, along with dozens of other example projects from guides like this one. So here's this, and then we've got a bunch of other F# projects as well. Of course, all the source code is here if you just want to copy and paste it as well, so that's fine too. Now that should get you started with F# Giraffe, a little crash course in building an app like that. And if you're curious what a real world full stack F# Giraffe web app looks like, and basically how I start all of my own web apps that I run for all my projects, Cloud Seed, which is my F# project boilerplate, gets you set up with a full stack web app in about 10 minutes, and you can learn more about that here and what it entails. Now, if you like this post, you might also like build a simple F# web API with Giraffe. Again, a deeper dive into F# and Giraffe itself, other ways to configure things, how to set up different kinds of endpoints, stuff like that. Might also be interested in build a simple markdown blog with F# Giraffe, which basically shows you how I built my blog here. My blog is running on F# Giraffe. This is all markdown here that is dynamically rendered. And finally, you might be interested in simple interactive islands with F# and HTMX. I'm a big fan of HTMX. It's basically how I build any more and more interactive web apps. And I think it plays really nicely with this kind of like functional server-side rendering approach. So that's it for this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.